I met with Roachford at the dopeYEAH Club following his previous night's brilliant performance at the club. Roachford's performance led us to talk about how much he loves to include his audience in his performance. We chatted about growing up in South London, listening to soul music in the family home, and learning to play the piano as a child. He tells me how he decided on a musical career at a very early age, despite his teacher's advice and the joys of playing Soho clubs on a school night. Getting a 7-album deal early in his career and finding enormous success so early on with Cuddly Toy. Some of the other highlights were meeting the great Mike Rutherford of Genesis and touring with Mike and the Mechanics, including a fun story about sharing a dressing room with Phil Collins. Jamming with theclash no less. Roachford, one of the truly great British artists. Andrew, thank you so much for coming. Welcome to dopeYEAH. This is our little abode here in Prague, and it's brilliant to have you. How have you been?
Good. I feel good now. I've got a bit of sleep. It's good to be here.
The first time, I was just saying to you last night, the first time that we ever met was at Glastonbury. And I was just a fan of yours at the time. You have to go back a few years here. And I always remember you did this, the usual sort of answer call thing with the audience. And I came up and did a little bit of answering calling with you at the gig. And that's before we ever knew each other, And here we are sitting in Prague doing a podcast. It's pretty surreal,
Yeah, I actually remember that because I was quite, sometimes you do the call and response thing with the audience and most people aren't singers. It's a bit sort of karaoke. But in your case, I was like, who's this? So rocking the mic. Give me the mic back.
It was great fun. I mean, the show last night was amazing. I have to say, it was absolutely the kind of energy was something I haven't seen in a long time. I mean, it was very emotional, but it was fun at the same time, which and it was very inclusive. Like everybody, I was just looking around the room, everybody was just having an amazing time, and I think that's kind of part of your kind of modus operandi, isn't it? To kind of be inclusive, but also to kind of get the energy moving backwards and forwards. Fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say. I mean, growing up, some of my favourite artists were naturally great performers. So it wasn't just that they were performing Switch It On because there's an audience. They were reacting to the feeling in the music and the lyric and the energy from the public, the audience. And including the audience in the experience,
Right.
And that always blew me away when I saw artists like that could do that and do that naturally. And I think I just grew into being that kind of performer.
Right. And was that what was the first record of that ilk that really moved the needle for you, would you say?
Move the needle, the first record for me, I guess it would have been, these are like my mum's records and my uncle's records, as a kid discovering the history of soul. And I remember these two albums that I liked because the front cover had naked women on them. And
As you do.
I don't think I actually listened to record for the first 6 months. But then there was Sly and the Family Stone on there, Family Affair, which that song really haunted me. There's something about it that I just thought, this is something from another planet, And remember hearing Smash Hits record with Hey Joe, first time hearing Jimi Hendrix.
Wow.
And again, that was like otherworldly experience. Even as a child, I just knew that this was something that was not like your average, everyday type of music. Let's put it that way.
Right.
And I think I could pick up on whatever that energy was. And just the attack coming from the guitar with Jimi Hendrix and the vocals with Sly and the Family Stone, the fact that they really, that gospel thing, and that really opened me up to where I wanted to go myself, musically.
Because you've always been a bit of a frustrated guitar player deep down, haven't you?
Yeah.
I mean, all the keyboard parts you write sometimes are quite,
Yeah. And I mean, growing up, because we had a piano in the house and not a guitar, that's where I headed for, because I wanted to make music. My mum was like, we got to get him lessons. So just automatically I went through the whole classical upstart, and it was always about the piano. But then hearing the blues, even as a kid, all my friends were listening to, I was a South London kid, either reggae, which I loved as well, because being Caribbean parents, but I liked to know where that feel came from, and it was blues. And a lot of the blues was guitar-based.
Of course.
And I loved guitar. but I'd learnt to play keyboards. So I thought, well, I'm going to make this as close as to the guitar as I can. I like when things are screaming, like the vocals, I like when they have that. And it's hard to do that on a piano.
That's true. I mean, as I said, that's what I've always loved about your voice, though. We were chatting earlier on about that full voice, that full attack, which you just don't get it so much anymore. And I think, I mean, there are singers now starting to come through. We talked about Teddy Swims and, new singers that are kind of embracing that rag and bone man, that whole full-on vocal thing. I think that's the gospel vibe in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I think last night, that's what I was thinking as well after the show. It was like a celebration. So it had that gospelness in the sense of, like, people were singing, people were engaging, people were joyous.
Yes.
And it's getting that balance. It's not in any way corny. It's just heartfelt.
Yeah.
And I think that's the great sort of joy of you as a performer for me, that right back to the very early days when I saw you, was that the truth in what you were doing. That's important to get across, isn't it?
Rob, it's called soul. It's called soul. And some people make the mistake that soul is just a sort of a type of music, a genre of music. But no, it's not. It's a feeling. Right. Johnny Mitchell's got soul. Some people, I think it's something that you're born with, that you are able to express things that you feel, intense feelings, but through musicality in a way that people understand that feeling. And it's not something you can teach people. You either instinctively know how to do it or you don't. And so what you're talking about, for me, I call it soul. And it's hard. It can be heart-wrenching. You can really, because every note that you play, you put yourself in it like it's your last day on the planet. And there's no other way for me. I can't. And when you talk about the sort of new singers, I love a lot of the contemporary music and the new artists coming up. But I think also a lot of singers have learned the technique, because now we have YouTube and they've learned this sort of the techniques of using the falsetto voice, because it's easier to sound sweet with it because of pure tone, and it's easier to pitch with it. When you're using your chest, there's a lot more muscularity going on. It's a lot harder to control that particular voice. So I think that's why people initially nowadays, they go for that sweet head sort of falsetto voice, because it's correct and it sounds really accomplished and nice.
And it's easier to pitch as well.
It's so easy to pitch, because you're not really using a lot of your body. When you're doing the falsetto, it's like a high note that's in your head, and it's just easy to control.
And auto-tune.
Well, auto-tune, that's a whole other thing.
But it is though. I mean, you know that as a producer as well. It's easy to auto-tune sweeter notes. It's like there's no vibrato going on. It's very easy to pitch, and you hear it in tunes all the time now. I mean, it's horses for courses, I suppose.
It's horses for courses.
But for me personally, it doesn't always work. I mean, you can't sort of, tar everything with the same brush. But for me, exciting-wise, emotionally, that kind of old school Sly and the Family Stone, Stevie Wonder, Otis Redding, they will always still be the greatest singers for me of all time.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even think that's so much just a generation thing. Who's going to replace the Aretha Franklins, the Stevie Wonders, the Otis Reddings, the Sam Cookes? I mean, you can't really call a name. You can call people that were great singers, but it's another level, stratosphere of artistry that I doubt will ever go back to that level. Whether people will want it anymore, because they're used to what they're used to. And each generation has to have their thing, because everything, especially music and art's constantly evolving, constantly changing, and you should definitely embrace it for what it is.
So growing up you grew up in London, obviously, but in what part of London did you grow up in?
Well, mostly in South London. So like Elephant Castle, Kennington, Streatham, Brixton. This is South London, proper South London. I went to school in an area called Peckham, which at the time wasn't the nicest area. These are sort of more working class areas.
Yeah. And so your dad played drums, didn't he, as well?
My dad did play drums. Yeah, he did. He played in my uncle's band for a while. And then he went off to Sweden and learnt orchestration and became a conductor. I thought they meant he was working on the buses. But apparently he was the first, if not only, black conductor in Sweden.
He must be very proud of you now, though. Do you speak at all now?
We haven't spoke. But I remember I did one gig, and I think he came down, and I know he follows everything that I do. And the name Roachford, it's just like my family. It's when you hear that name, associated to music, it's your family. Yeah.
And so your brother, obviously, he played guitar as well, didn't he? He was a guitar player.
Yeah, my brother played guitar with me. He kind of came up through more, he wasn't as naturally musical as me, but he had no choice really growing up in my family that he's going to get the bug at some point. So
he was the older brother, was he?
He was actually younger, 2 years younger, and sadly passed away a few years ago. But he played guitar in my band, and it was great, having a family member that understands completely what it is you're trying to do and the journey you've been through to get where you are. Not every musician can get their heads around that.
So you're usually, because I was thinking if he was the older brother, you would have been very influenced by his taste, but you must have been listening to what your mum and dad were listening to at home a lot.
Yeah.
Which was...
Yeah, I mean, I lived in a household, which was a typical Caribbean household where there were lots of parties and they'd bring in speakers and stuff and they would play what was their, I guess, club and pop music of the time, which was Stax soul music mostly, Otis Redding, Marvin Gaye, Motown stuff. And it's a healthy environment to grow up in as a young musician because that music is such a high level of musicality. And yet it's still commercial songs. They were heartbreak songs. Most of them are about, the black Americans and the Caribbeans were very romantic in their lyrics, So I grew up a lot with that. It wasn't heady at all, it was about the feel. Everything was about feel and about, they would dance together very intimately and all, I think I had more my sex education from that. But it was all about the feel and the heart, If you understand, it wasn't intellectual music at all. Some of it was very clever, but yeah.
Did the aunties and stuff bring their own records with them? Because, you'd bring your own few vinyls with you to the party, probably.
Exactly. It was all vinyl, so you had to be really committed and into it. You couldn't just rock up with a USB or you had to carry your vinyl box and stuff. And the aunties used to rock up with their favourite rhythm and blues track or reggae because, my family all being Caribbean immigration family, it was a lot of reggae music as well. And Bob Marley, and going back before that, John Holt and Dennis Brown and all these great singers as well that were influenced by American black singers.
And what about your friends at the time, like your contemporaries, like your mates? And that was that a lot of top 40 Radio 1 stuff you were listening to? So you're mixing all that in your head.
Yes, yeah, because growing up in London, you had Radio 1 and everyone listened to the same chart. And it was all about what was in the top 20, top 40. And that was like pop music of the time. And then punk came in. And all of this sort of, what I love about UK, England, was that the immigrants had cross-pollinated the British sound, and the culture on the street level had mixed, and so the music was mixed. And so reggae became a big part of British pop music. And also I listened to this stuff like Thin Lizzy, which was, again, it was a weird mix of stuff. It had a bit of the Irish folk in it, and yet it was rock, American stuff. So it was very, very mad mix used to go on.
And you can't imagine what it was like. I mean, Phil was such a unique character. I toured with Thin Lizzy back in the day as the support band.
Wow.
And so I knew Phil quite well. And Brian Downey. And I mean, Phil was a totally very proud Irish, but obviously a black guy. I mean, he was the only black guy I'd ever met when I was growing up in Ireland. I mean, at that time, when there was no black people in Ireland. He was the only one I knew. Yeah. And he was just so much fun on the road and very kind of loyal to everybody. But he was an amazing character. I mean, I loved Phil. Great songwriter. Yeah. Really, really great songwriter. So you're a kind of young kid in London, just trying to get a feel for, you obviously... Was there a moment when you thought, well, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life? Or were you thinking about what you're going to do? Because you started playing professionally when you were like 14.
Yeah.
So that's like very early doors.
Yeah. I mean, I remember my school teachers had a meeting with my mother and said, listen, he's not doing so well at school, but he's been distracted by music. So you need to get him to stop doing music for just 2 years, up to when he does his exams, and then he can start playing music again. And that was, my mum was just like...
Never going to happen.
It's never going to happen. Because they knew, like, from when I was born, that early, they just knew that I was going to be a musician, you know. So there was never any doubt. And it wasn't just some of my friends at school wanted to be pop stars, you know, and famous. They knew that it was deeper than that for me, and that I could actually ride the business, because I'm about the music. It's my life. It's who I am. So my mum basically told the teachers where to get off. And then years later, I remember after I had the first big success, big hits in the UK, my maths teacher got in touch with my mum and said, "I'm so glad you didn't listen to us." You know? So yeah, I was always, and then I started making money from music before I left school. I was gigging in the bars in Soho in London with my uncle, but they were all so much older than me. And some of the bars had strippers and everything. And I was not legal that I was there, but that was in the days of, you know, Soho was lawless in a way.
Wow, yeah.
And so I was there seeing naked women and stuff and the whole thing, and playing with musicians that are really a lot better way better than I was. I was beginning, you know. And then when I get to school, I would finish work at 3 a.m., get home at 4 on the night bus,
wow,
go to school, and I was always falling asleep in the school, and they thought something was wrong with me because I was always... And I couldn't tell my friends, you know, that I was living the life, you know.
But your uncle, you were saying earlier on before we started the chat, that he was very strict. So he was like quite a taskmaster as well, kind of making you really get your chops up to speed and timing, and being very very strict.
My uncle was like the hardest guy to work and play music with, because he played saxophone, but he was like always ears on you. And if you played one wrong note, he would turn around and go, "Ah," and always tell you this. He's playing a song. 1, 2, 3, 4. And he's like, timing. And to the point where you're so scared to play. And he, timing, you know, and always pushing. But the good thing is that as an adult, everything, I can say my timing is perfect because he made sure. He just drummed it in, you know, timing. And it is a big, important thing. But
yeah, sure.
Yeah, you know, and at the time I didn't realize how I would be grateful for his personality and his strictness, you know. And he was right what he was saying.
Well, timing is important, isn't it? Joe Strummer said once, it's like you're only as good as your drummer.
Yes.
You know, a band is only as good as the drummer, you know, and he's absolutely right. So you, obviously working with him, you're 14, you're playing all the clubs. I mean, how did it get to the point where you're doing your own songs and thinking about forming your own band and et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. I think growing up as a kid, I always liked composing little ditties, little songs, but they were just, you know, 20 seconds, da-da-da. And when I started getting more advanced in my piano lessons, my teacher realized that I wasn't as interested in it. And her way of keeping me in the lessons was, she'd say, when you finish a lesson, you can play me your latest composition. Right. And I looked forward to that. And that's got me through the lesson. So
right, sure.
And then my mum brought me a little multi-track Porter studio. And then I was away. I had so many ideas. And meanwhile, I was still gigging with my uncle. And then I was playing at one bar, and this guy heard me singing. And he said, do you have any recordings with your own songs on? Do you write songs? And then I gave him the cassette. And I must have been about 16, maybe. And he disappeared for maybe like 6 months. But he worked at Island Records, and the tape was just going around. And then the other labels were hearing about it. Who is this kid? You know? And I remember going to one meeting at a record label, and the guy went, "Who played the instrumentation on the demo?" And I went, "I did." He's like, "No, but all of that stuff." And I said, "I played it all." He was like, "Get out." He didn't believe me. And I was with my mum. He was so rude. He said, "Get out, you're lying."
That is so...
And I was so upset. My mum said it's a big compliment that he doesn't believe you played everything on those tracks.
Do you remember the first tune you wrote that you were really proud of?
Well, I remember when I was a kid, I wrote this song, and my mum would get her friends, her female friends around, and they'd sit around like a piano, Andrew, play that song that you wrote the other day and sing that song. And I would play it and I was singing my heart out and I'd open my eyes and they were in the back kind of, you know, slightly laughing. I thought, it's not that bad. And the song was called All of My Life I've Been Searching for a Wife. Now, I don't know why I wrote that lyric, if it just because it rhymed or whatever, but all of my life I've been searching for a wife and, you know, singing my little heart out. And they were laughing at me because it's like, obviously, my life was only a few years. And so, but then when I wrote this song called Kathleen, which was such a mix of styles.
Very Irish name.
Yeah, with my mum's name, you know. Mm-hmm. And that's what got me my first record deal. That's what got me the record deal because it was so different from anything, especially a black kid was, you know, you couldn't even put your finger on what kind of music it was, you know. And I was lucky enough to also be in a studio for like a year working around the Clash. And it was completely different music, punk rock. I hated it when I first started working in their studio. But after like 6 months, I started to, you start to get an ear for things and it broadened my taste as well. So yeah, Kathleen was probably the one, well, it was the one that I got signed to Sony CBS.
So that was your big break, your 7-album deal.
Yeah.
I mean, that must have been a great call to get.
Yeah.
That was Columbia, yeah.
That
Sony
was
Columbia.
Yeah, Sony Columbia. And what they said to me is, we love your music, your recordings, but the only way you can get the deal is we don't know if you can play live. And for me, that was like, I've been playing live since I was 14. So what are they talking about? It was almost like, I thought they were joking, but they weren't used to people that could when they were that young. And so there was like, they came to a showcase and that was it, 7-album deal, which I didn't really know at the time what that meant and how significant that was, because all I wanted was to be able to afford to have my instruments that I really loved, that I saw in the music shop that I couldn't afford. And also, for technical reasons, I had to be on the dole and I didn't like signing on. Mm-hmm. And I guess just tools to write and make music with. And I hadn't thought past that, really. But obviously, a major label, you know, they had big plans, you know. If you're not going to be a star, we're not interested. That's what it's about, you know. And so it was a whole nother world. I remember doing my first gig and the record company all came down, and because I was such a musician, I had 3 keyboards. It was like Nick Kershaw or something. And they couldn't even see me and they were horrified. They were like, we want you to be a pop star, you know. And I had to get rid of 2 of the keyboards and you know.
So who's the first producer that you worked with on that deal for the first album?
Yeah, my first album, I didn't really know what a producer did. You know, I'd heard the word, but I didn't know. And so basically they were like, who do you want to produce your album? I don't know. So they just got me someone who was a friend of a friend of a friend. And I didn't know the guy, I didn't know what he did. And his name was Mike Vernon. Mm-hmm. And he was, that I later got to know was like a blues guy. And because my music had elements of blues in it, they picked him. And he's a great producer. He's a great guy and a great producer. However, he was a traditionalist.
Right.
So we had lots of fights over what's right and what's wrong. Because I always wanted to do stuff that was not the norm by the book. I was like, well, there's the book, let's try that. But he wanted to do things like, well, this is how you do it. But we made a great record together.
Amazing record.
Thank you very much. And it did really well. Funny thing is that the biggest song on it was called Cuddly Toy, wasn't written when I was in the studio with Mike Vernon. At his studio, Chipping Norton in Oxfordshire. And that song, which was my biggest hit in the UK, just came about because I wanted an extra song to play live and do a James Brown thing. I was into James Brown, and you know, and the record company were like, what is this song that you play live that's not on the album? The album was already packaged. Oh, God. They were like, record it, and they said, take the album out. I think there were copies in the shop. They had to take everything out, repackage it with this extra song.
And didn't Muff Winwood, he wasn't very happy with the title, isn't he?
Muff Winwood, the head of A&R, said to me, what is the name of the song? And he already knew that but he wanted me to tell him. I was like, it's called Cuddly Toy. He was like, no, it's not. You can't call it Cuddly Toy, you know. This is not like a serious... And I think what it was, not being funny as well, being black, I think people didn't expect you to have a sense of irony and sense of humor in your own music. They just didn't see, they didn't get the fact that I was being funny. They just thought I was being silly. Like, I just thought it was I knew it was silly. That was the idea.
Yeah. Sure.
And they just missed the whole tongue-in-cheekness of the song.
Because obviously, just sort of moving past that. So you make the record, it's a big success.
Yeah.
So that must have been a real head fuck.
Yeah.
Getting to that, literally your first album, straight out of the blocks, it's doing brilliantly. The single's a huge success. So, you come from playing little venues in Soho to being a star for all intents and purposes. Was that difficult to cope with at the time, or you just ran with it, or how did...
Being famous, so to speak, happened literally. Like, I've been gigging, we've been going up and down in an old white van playing, and then a hit, and then all of a sudden people looking at you on the street. I remember turning up at the radio station to do a live interview, and there was just hundreds of girls outside, like, and I said to the driver, who are they waiting for? And he was like, you pillock. And they had to get security, and I was just like, what? And there was one girl, she was banging on the window. She said, come over. And she had a piece of paper with my address. I know where you live. And I got home and I had turned off all the lights in the house and I was sneaking under the windows, and I started to have like paranoia, driving around in cars with black windows, because I'm a very private person. And all of a sudden going into the supermarket, everyone's just looking at you and people are doing strange things. People start behaving very differently.
So obviously things have changed a bit now, but at the time it was quite daring what you were doing musically, mixing genres and mixing styles. You were mixing rock with soul, with funk, with whatever your head decided on the day, which is, is it fair to say that, say, on the American side, which obviously Columbia was mainly an American company, I think. Was there any kind of trying to influence you to be more R&B or less...
In America?
Yeah.
Big time. In America, my music all of a sudden became very political for the record company, because they felt like I was mixing black and white. And they didn't want those two to mix, because they had a whole separate marketing department for one or the other. And there was me right somewhere in the middle. And so it was like, you need to take your guitar out of your music. They told me straight, David Massey. Sat me down and said, as long as you keep putting this distortion in your guitar, we have a problem with you. Whoa. He said, we love you as an artist, but no guitar, please. And I was just like, what?
So how did you fight that battle? How did you...
Well, I basically, what they did was, in America, is I kept putting guitar on my albums and they kept not putting them out, but not letting me off the label, which is called shelving.
Yeah.
Until then I had a new manager that told me what they're doing was actually illegal contractually, because if they're not going to put out after one album, they have to let you go. And so there was this bit of a fight. And then the American side, to keep me happy, put one album out just to shut me up. But it was all political because of this guitar. And I just thought, but nowadays, you see Billie Eilish, and she's talking, saying, I can't imagine what it was like then, where you couldn't be eclectic in music, because now you're allowed to do that. Kanye West, people like that, they just shook the whole thing up, and a younger generation are growing up a bit more open to, what's the big deal? Bit of rock guitar in the chorus, what's the big deal? It's no longer this big sort of cultural divide.
So that's the big sort of positives and negatives about having a major deal, isn't it? You get into the majors, you'll be careful what you wish for sometimes.
Yes.
And
they can afford to mess you about.
Yeah, and that thing of shelving was criminal in my view. I don't know how they're allowed to do that. You should be able to walk if you want to walk, in my view.
I think if more of the management and the lawyers were prepared to stand up. Problem is that the lawyers had other interests, because they didn't want to piss off the record companies, because it could be another gig that they could get with another band. So it was all very incestuous in that way. But really, if you think about it, keeping an artist on a label that you're not releasing, how can that not be illegal? How can that not be illegal? Fair play. If you don't want the album, someone else will.
Yeah, I mean, you've always been pretty fearless in that respect. Like back in the 80s, say, for instance, like if people were dropped, it was the end of everything.
Yes.
And it never was, in my view. It's like you'll find another way through, and you always did.
Yeah, if you're crap, well, then maybe it's the end.
Fair point.
But for me, I mean, I remember some of my friends who were signed to a major label, and the idea of not being with a major label anymore scared the bejesus out of them. Not me, because I was like, listen, I've been making music before I had a record deal, quite well, and I'm thinking about the next record, and I always felt like the labels need you, and they've actually brainwashed you to think that you need them. But without an artist, what is a label?
Yeah.
They're nothing. So stop getting, just try and make the best music that you can and concentrate on that. Get good management and let them worry about how it's going to get out. And of course, now the internet comes in. People can put out albums on their own. They can record. You don't need to go to $1 million studio. Mm-hmm. Back then, you had to spend $2,000 a day to record an album. You spent like months in the studio. Who can afford that? So you needed a major label.
Yeah,
and then they sign you, but then the interest rate is so ridiculous that, well, they can't lose really, because in time you have to sell like so many records just to break even with them, because their interest rate is so high, if you know what I mean.
But like,
you do.
Yeah, of course, I've been there and done that one. I bought the T-shirt. Yeah. But like, you obviously have Barbados heritage, and I think we've spoken about this before. There's a similar sort of culture in Barbados and in Ireland where kind of music is part of your being. It's like breathing. So you kind of, it's not separate from you. So I think it's a lot easier to cope in the music business if you have this love of music. You always have it to fall on. No matter what happens, you'll find a way through, as I said earlier on. I remember when, one day when I was back in, when I was an artist once upon a time. And I remember I had like the worst day. My girlfriend dumped me because I was never going back to Ireland. And then went to my management from a retainer. He said, we're going bankrupt. We can't pay you. And I get home and, my landlord was throwing me out of my flat because they hadn't paid my rent for 3 months. Yeah. And I had like £5 in my pocket. Yeah. And then I remember kind of meeting a friend of mine and sort of, a soul singer from New York, and she said, let's busk down in like Leicester Square or whatever. I thought, I don't know, man. She's like, come on, get your ass together. Let's do it. Let's put some backing tracks. I had a little studio in my house, a little 4-track. We put some backing tracks together, and then we sung on went down to Covent Garden and all the rest of it, and sung and busked to try and find our way out. You just felt like, one day I found myself at the end of an escalator, with my guitar singing Simply Red songs. In fact, I was listening to you today doing your cover of that Simply Red song you did.
It's Holding Back the Years.
I used to sing that at the end of the escalator, and I used to sing Cuddly Toy as a song on the end of an escalator, because it was like I was at rock bottom, but, got my money together, crawled my way back, but because there was no choice.
Yes.
It was this or nothing. I think that makes the best of kind of artists.
Well, I say to the young artists today, if they want any advice, if you're if you're not passionate about the music and you get in this game and it's all about the fame, you're very vulnerable, because it's just going to be like that anyway. There's going to be up, there's going to be downs, and the only way you can ride that is if you're driven and passionate about the music. If you are, then you'll win-win. You're always winning in a way, because you're still doing what it is you love doing, and you get to do it for a living, and most people don't. Mm-hmm. So that's a winning, and everything else is icing on the cake. Of course, we all want to sell platinum albums and, have hits and fill massive venues and stuff. But end of the day, I always feel, no matter where it is with me, that I'm winning, because I get to play music, and really, I've never had another job.
I know, mate. Well, I think you're pretty unique that way. Nearly everybody's had some kind of day job at some point, and that's pretty unique.
Yeah.
I mean, but as a young lad, in South East London, South West London, you must, in your wildest dreams, you couldn't have imagined that like one of the members of Genesis would give you a call.
Yeah.
I mean, that must have been pretty bizarre.
And I got the member from Genesis calling me without warning. Actually, at first it was his producer, Chris Neal, called me and said, Michael Rutherford from Genesis and Mike and Mechanics wants to meet you in lieu to about songwriting. Really? Okay. Went to his house, met the great Mike Rutherford.
Amazing.
And he has a guitar on him. And he's like, oh, do you mind if I play you a couple of the ideas I've got so far? He starts playing some minor key thing. I think it was like... And he got a keyboard set up for me. And I start humming along, thinking that we've gone for a meeting and, we're having a jam. It's weird, you know. The next thing I know, we're writing a song on that spot or getting ideas, and he's made up his mind. We go out the room, and he said, I know you're doing your Roachford thing, but would you be up for, you know, we might make an album with us and maybe touring around your Roachford schedule? And I went, wow, this is weird. And I went home and told my brother, I think I'm in Mike and the Mechanics. and I was, you know.
What did he say? He must have been...
He was like, what? And I was like, yeah. And I remember the first gig we did was a Prince's Trust thing, and I had to share a dressing room with Phil Collins, who I'd never met. And we walked in and he had his trousers down. Hi, Phil. Andrew Roachford, nice to meet you. That was the first Mike and Mechanics gig. We were sharing a dressing room with Phil. Wow. So everything was a bit sort of surreal. And that was the last time that anyone saw Phil trying to play drums in public because he was getting problems, you know.
Yeah.
Lovely guy, you know. And I remember his words to me. He said, so you're in Mike and Mechanics? I went, yeah. He said, are you enjoying it? I said, I don't know yet. It's my first gig. But he had me worried because he was going, are you enjoying it? Yeah.
So that must have been like, because I've listened, because you did a couple of records with them. I listened to them this morning doing my due diligence, and I thought they were terrific. And but a different approach vocally, like very much you. It's very much, you'd know it's you, but a bit more understated, like in the approach.
Yeah.
And because it's kind of. But you still made it yours. The phrasing was still yours, you know, like the way you finished the lines and the notes, and because they had some great singers on it, Paul Young and Paul Carrick, great singers. So
great singers.
I mean, you hear that and you go, it was a bit nearly like Foreigner, you know, in some ways, you know, that kind of American AOR, and and it had that kind of quality to it. It was very, and I just think it was genius of Mike Rutherford to think of you, because you pull it off brilliantly, and it seems like so natural. Did you feel that when you got into the band? You're like, oh my God, I can totally do this.
Yeah, well, when I got into the band, it was an adjustment period because I didn't know how I'd find my way where I sit in that. I didn't want to get too gospel-y around because Mike wasn't about that, you know. He's about like, it is the AOR kind of straight ahead, you know. And even though a lot of people said that Paul Carrick was obviously a soul singer in a sense, it wasn't as soul as I knew it, you know. It was more of again, it had a tainted, blue-eyed soul, they called it, with that American, you know, Eagles or something like that, which I love. And, you know, Paul Carrick's tonality and control, the voice, is second to none. So I just thought, and then I had to sing all the hits as well, like the Paul Carrick stuff, like The Living Years and
great tune.
Oh, The Living Years, what a song, you know.
Amazing tune.
And that song was, I think, number 2 when I was number 4, or they were number 3 in the same week as Cuddly Toy. They were like my enemies, you know. And I end up in the band.
How bizarre is that?
So crazy, you know. But then I found Mike just wanted me to be me, you know, and because we wrote the songs together. With Chris Neal and whatever. But I think in the first album was just finding, you know, because it felt like a different part of my voice, you know.
Yeah.
And I ended up just in the control room with an SM58 and singing like if it was live, because the only way I could sort of make those songs work. So they're all done like live takes, you know.
Brilliant.
I was no headphones.
Wow.
Yeah.
Feedback from the speakers, the whole lot.
Feedback from the speakers, shout. Thankfully, I got quite a loud voice, so the signal to noisy with the speakers. My voice, and then the speakers were really quiet, so I didn't have the problem with too much spill. Yeah.
The other thing I got to ask you about is the Clash. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the Clash.
Yeah.
You tell us the story about your thing with the Clash.
So basically, I was at music college for 2 years, and then some guy comes up to me and said, "Hey, there's a studio looking for in-house musician to do like adverts and stuff and do for a band, but I can't tell you the name of the band, whatever. I go down to the studio and I grew up playing this and electric pianos, and all they had was a synthesizer. I think it was a Jupiter 8 or something. And I walked in and I saw these lights and buttons and I went... And they thought I couldn't play.
Right.
But then weeks later, I think they came back to the college and they heard rumours that I could play and whatever. So I get the job, but the Clash were on tour in America at the time with David Bowie. I think they were opening for him or something like that. And so I'd heard the name of the Clash, but I didn't really know much about them. Mm-hmm. They were huge, but I didn't know because I wasn't in the punk world. I was a real musician. And then, so we were at the studio every day doing these little advert things, but no Clash. And then one day they get back from America and I see all these guitars coming in, and I'd never seen like Road Crew. I'd never seen like, 5 guitars with the same stickers on, so they're identical. And I was like, I thought you only had one. And then 5 Fender basses with the same stickers on. Who is this band? And they've got people to tune their instruments. What's going on? And then the Clash turn up and they start rehearsing at the studio every day. And they were working on their last album, which was called Cut the Crap. It wasn't great, but they were having problems with members. They got rid of people. But every day I was in the studio like this, like the first sort of couple of weeks, not knowing that there's two-way glass and they could see me. And one day, Joe Strummer, that's how I met him, he goes, we can see you. And I went, oh, sorry. He's like, no. He said, I've heard you sing. He said, if I had a voice like yours, this is what he said. He was a lovely guy.
Yeah.
I won't be in this band. I'll be with you, mate. He was really lovely, and he gave me so much encouragement and pointers and stuff, because he was obviously very... experienced in the game and lovely. And I started getting into their music, London's Calling and, Rock the Casbah and all that. And I became a fan. And I used to go on the road with them sometimes. They would do these road trips.
Wow.
Some of them were just really for press things. And so you get on the coach and you were sort of put on there as well to sort of make them look cooler, because you had a couple of black guys, and they'd play in Brixton.
Wow, so he took you under his wing?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Joe Strummer. And then the last time I saw Joe Strummer was at Glastonbury, and I happened to be walking across the field, and he walked past, he said, hey, I've got recordings with us jamming on it together, but I need to find a 2-inch 8-track machine, and I can't find one. And apparently there's like loads of tapes of me jamming with Joe and the guys.
Wow, you should get them.
And then literally like weeks after that, he had a heart attack. I think he had a heart attack. Yeah, and he was gone.
Oh
so that I don't know where those tapes are.
They'll be somewhere. Someone will have them.
Yeah.
Anyone out there and
yes,
listening, get us those tapes.
If you got a 2-inch 8-track machine, they had this 8-track, but it was a 2-inch. It was beautiful.
So you've obviously done a huge amount of live work. I mean, just as a fun question, like best gig, worst gig.
Talking about that, once I started getting out there was loads of people that were getting in touch with my management,
right.
That I would never have dreamt of. I had like Michael Jackson's people were getting in touch with me. Billy Joel invited me to his show and then got me backstage asking me how I wrote Cuddly Toy. Wow. And like all these big names. And do you remember, was it Steve Miller, the Joker, the guy that did the Joker?
Oh yeah, Steve Miller.
Yeah, we toured together and he was just like, you remind me of Sly and the Family Stone. All these, Elton John. I mean, it was just like pretty nuts overnight, But as far as my favourite live gig, there's so many great gigs. It's hard to say, but one occasion I remember was when we opened up for In Excess at Wembley Stadium.
Amazing.
And it was somewhere In Excess, and we went on, and it was packed. It wasn't one of those gigs where it was packed. And it's like, I'm at Wembley Stadium, and I'd seen Queen doing that, Radio Gaga. So I put my hands out and went. And the whole, I think it was 75,000, 80,000 people put their hands up. And I went, oh my God, this is ridiculous. And my mum was in the audience,
Amazing.
And that was pretty special. We played about 45-minute set. We went to town up there.
Fantastic.
And did you say a low light?
Yeah, like the lowest gig, the worst gig.
I think before, in the early days, some of the gigs, but you know what? For me, once I was playing music. I was in my own world anyway. So whether you're coming with this or not, which most people get caught up in it. I mean, you saw like last night, maybe people took a bit of warming, but they get caught up in that feeling because it's not something you get every day, you know. So I remember doing one gig where we played and I had bad food poisoning and I had to hold it together for like an hour and a half, you know. And I remember one gig like needing to go like do a pee, and I go to my drummer, do a drum solo. I didn't realize how far the toilet was from the backstage, and he was like, and then it went on, and people were like, "What's going?" And I came back like 6 minutes late.
I wouldn't go in there for 15 minutes.
I wouldn't go in there if I were you. But yeah, no.
So have you got any sort of bucket list people you'd love to work with?
I mean, I remember always wanting to work with Al Green because I felt like his kind of Southern soul was so close to what I was trying to do.
Duets or?
Actually write something with or for him. But I convinced myself there's no way I can, you know. And then I was in Philadelphia. You
never know. But you might ring him up and he'd just go, yeah, come around.
Exactly.
You know?
And they told me, because I actually didn't investigate, and he didn't really have like this big management team. He had like some girl answering the phone, which was like his cousin or his daughter or something. It was really close.
Right.
He kept it very... and then I remember being in Philadelphia meeting Questlove, the drummer. And like, yeah, what projects are you working at? Oh, I just got the Al Green. He then got to do an Al Green album. And I knew him and I was so jealous. I was like, so it can, you know, you just have to believe that. And so Al Green would be one. Stevie Wonder.
Of course.
To just be on an album playing spoons.
I was listening to Talking Book today.
Oh.
Yeah, the vocals so
Talking
late.
Book, that's the album. You have to...
Yeah.
Stevie Wonder, Talking Book.
That's one of my favourite records of all time. But the vocals are so back in the mix.
Yeah.
It's like really back in the mix, but they're just beautiful records.
Yeah, those guys that did the, you know, the mixing and the production on it, you know, they had a sound. So it had a landscape about it. And it was crazy because me being a keyboard player and then hearing that album, apart from the track with Jeff Beck on it, I think it's all keyboards. It was all keyboards. And I just didn't know, you know, because like Superstition is keyboards. It was written for guitar. Yeah, sure. Again, he's a keyboard player, Stevie. He can't really play much guitar. But he wanted it to sound like a guitar riff. So he distorted clav. And there you go. And so that inspired me like, oh, you can get a kind of... There's a band in Australia called Mr. Hands, and they were a rock band, but there was no guitarist. It was just bass, and the keyboard player was playing all the stuff, distorting, and I was like, yeah, you can do it. You can do it.
So what do you think, having been in the industry your whole life, what's been the most challenging part of it for you?
I think the most challenging thing was learning about how to deal with the press and how you have to get a thick skin. Because my first interviews that I did, the way they changed my words on the written interviews was shocking. How they changed it to make me look completely different from what I was like. And I had to get my head around that. You have to get your head around someone coming to a gig and you can see them in the audience, that you know that they're there to review the gig and everyone else is jumping up and down and it's going, the house is rocking. One person standing there going, and then you know you're going to get a bad review no matter how good the gig was. That took a bit of, you know. But my first ever review on my album, my first one that ever I read was brought to me, said, black guys trying to sound like white guys trying to sound like black guys. And that was it. The first one. I was like, welcome to the British media, you know.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was a tough bit. And just learning that, you know, remember that on one level it's a business.
Yeah.
And you don't take things personal. You do your thing and you play to those who really want to get it, you know. And then once you get over that, then you're kind of untouchable.
Yeah, well, it's like the old saying, isn't it? Opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one. Yeah. You know, it's just an opinion, isn't it?
And not everyone is giving their opinion and being honest. They just want to say something contrary and be, you know, I think the English press at one point hated the fact that if everyone was complimenting you, they would go the other way. And if people thought you were crap, then they just wanted to be contrary. And that was the hardcore NMEs and the Melody Maker. It wasn't about music, was it really? It was about being cool, and most of their demographic was like angry young student guys who couldn't play, and so whatever.
So what's for the rest of the year? What have you got on?
Well, this year, last year was really busy, touring, a lot of touring, and I did manage to put an album together, as you know. But I want to get back in the studio. I feel inspired, and I know me. When that's happening, get in the studio and start writing. When I get that little bug and a little bit of a fire, even though it's not any particular ideas, it's just an energy, get in the studio. So I'm basically going to be doing a lot of writing. I'm trying to get out to Nashville and experiment with that thing, because in Nashville, writing and musicianship over there, I'd like to just see what happens when you put Mr. Roachford out there, do you know what I mean?
I think it'd be amazing. There's some amazing writers out there, and the musicianship is off the scale as well.
Exactly.
Fantastic
I love it.
players. It's all very organic, mainly in the whole, it's like live instruments.
Yeah.
So that's right up your alley.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's this year. I will be doing some shows later in the year, in Europe as well, because I haven't done anything for a while, a couple of years out there, properly, So, yeah, it's going to be a pretty full-on year, I reckon.
Do you prefer to write on your own or with somebody else?
Well, I started out, like, the first 4 or 5 albums was more or less just me. And then I started branching out and started co-writing, and then I got completely into this, I can't write unless I'm writing with other people. And recently, the last guy that I've been writing with a lot, Jimmy Hogarth, he kept saying, you need to start writing your own again. He said, I think you've kind of hypnotized yourself that you can't, even though most stuff that he liked of mine was done, and he looks on the credits, it's just me, So I want to find that mojo again. I think it's just confidence got a little bit. You start thinking, whatever, the thing that an artist has to be careful of is that his fans or his idea of what they want doesn't lead the artist. You have to lead your fans. You have to bring them to wherever it is in the journey that you're going. Because if you start trying to cater for what you think and you kind of put yourself in this box where you can't go out of it. So what if I want to do a reggae track? Do it, Andrew, just do it. Get the music out there. When you're in a creative environment, try and switch that side of your brain off about, my fans wouldn't like it because they think that I'm this. You know what you are, just do it. So that's where I'm, who knows what the next album is going to be? It might be a punk album.
Hey, put the rest of the Clash together and get them in.
Celtic sort of fucking rock, right?
Celtic punk.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thanks a million for doing this. It's been so amazing to sit down and chat with you. And one last favour, would you possibly play us a tune on the piano? We have one here that we conjured up recently. So have you got anything in particular you'd like to play? Or?
I don't know. I could sort of fuck around for a bit, see what happens.
Find whatever floats your boat, mate, is fine by me. Anything at all would be amazing, because it's a great sounding piano. You're here. Yeah. You're fabulous. Fabulous piano, fabulous artist. Andrew, thank you so much, man.
Pleasure, man. Good to talk to you.
Yeah.
If we could have the world, something that makes us better, like a million diamonds and pearls, would they matter? We've been looking everywhere for something that makes us happy, but it's always been right here, where you and me have everything we need. 'Cause we got all the love, we got all the love we need. You and me got more than just enough. We got all the love we need. And as long as you're here with me, there ain't nothing that we can't just enough. We got all the love we need. You could have silver and gold and all the things that people dream of. But if you've got no hand to hold, it's not enough, could never be enough. But we got all the love, we got all the love we need. You and me got, oh, more than just enough. We got all the love we need. And as long as you're here with me, there ain't nothing that we can't be. Oh, we got, oh, more than just enough. We got all the love we need.
Woo! Thank you, man. That's so wonderful. Thank you. Brilliant. I think that's a wrap. Thank you, man.